You're driving in a car from Sydney and you want to get to Brisbane, but you're facing south.
Dad! Dad, are we there yet?
No matter how much you slow down,
Are we there yet, Dad?
you're never going to get to Brisbane. What you need to do is turn around and change direction to get closer to your goal. If we think about the great strides made by the likes of Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, Einstein, they all came with ideas that were groundbreaking in their own way, and yet were met with skepticism. Who would have said in the 16th century that it could be proven that the Earth went round the sun and not the other way around? Galileo proved that for us. Who would have argued that something heavier than air could actually fly? And yet the Wright brothers did that. Who would have said that a man would have been on the moon by the end of the 1960s? And yet there was Neil Armstrong taking that giant leap for mankind. History has shown that courageous minds who dare to think differently, backing their visions in the face of resistance, they are the source of innovation. The only real and persistent source of competitive advantage is the rate at which innovation occurs within your organization. That innovation is the rate at which knowledge is created and converted into additional value and wealth.
Any organization delivers social outcomes, and the better it delivers those outcomes, often the better it also delivers economic outcomes.
Where we are now is right at the end of the industrial age. We're at the end of an epoch.
Prevailing thinking is very focused on business as usual activities, meeting this year's budget.
The industrial age is coming crashing down, whether we're talking about climate change or whether we're talking about financial crises, whatever it is that we're talking about, something has shifted and moved.
If the environment falls apart, everything falls down. Economics falls down, family falls down, society collapses.
It's really about how do you position your enterprise to be productive where there's an unprecedented demand for resource. The competitive advantage that you might have had in the past is simply not going to be there anymore. And those who are able to be more productive are the ones that are going to be able to sustain their organizations deep into the future. It is a hypothesis that states that systems are governed by few things. What's the system in the business? Well, it's the business itself. What we've created at Ensemble is a new way of managing work. Our methods are grounded in science and therefore are empirically proven to increase productivity. At the most general level, all work can be characterized by a number of process steps. Each person in the process does a component part of the overall work to deliver an end product or service that creates value for the customer. And so long as the capacity to do work exceeds the demand placed on the system doing the work, there is an equilibrium. So even in this so-called steady state where we have a balance between supply and demand, if we look a little bit deeper, we will find that there is always a constraint. And looking at the system from the outside, the constraint is always in one of three places: in supply to our system, in our ability to make what the market calls for from us, or in the marketplace itself. In other words, we have more capacity than the market is willing to buy. And usually in this steady state is a situation that's ripe for disruption. A competitor comes along, a customer falls away, some different product substitutes for your product. In these kinds of environments, things then change. The traditional model of managing complexity looks to do so by breaking things up into their different pieces. So we're trying to optimize the parts in the hope that that will produce the best possible result for the system. We'll look at each part in isolation and invoke them to go harder, to go stronger, to go faster. Everybody does appear to be very busy without any sense of what is that critical thing that really is going to make the difference. Because what's happening is that at the bottleneck, the work is building up.
There's a tendency to say, well, everything's priority, everything's got to be done.
An inevitable effect of any bottleneck is a build-up of work in process. And everybody works harder and the work builds up even more because we cannot produce more than the bottleneck is capable of actually producing. As work in process builds up, it slows overall flow, eats more capital, and takes you further from your goal. No matter how hard everybody works, the thing that's going to determine how much work actually gets done in terms of value delivered to a customer is going to be governed by the constraint. In the same way that the visionaries of old challenged our worldviews, using sound reason, the assumptions that underpinned the Industrial Revolution become less and less useful in the age of knowledge. In our far more complex and interconnected world, taking the historical reductionist approach to the management of work can be superseded by a systems thinking view that understands the whole and therefore focuses on those few things that determine the rate at which value is created. On the assumption that your enterprise has a clearly defined goal. What the theory of constraints says is that any system has got very few things, quite often only one thing, that governs the rate at which value is created. And the first order of business is to identify the constraint. Once we have identified the bottleneck, it's critical to get as much out of it as we possibly can. An inevitable consequence of having a constraint is that non-constraints have capacity available. The work of non-constraints is to synchronize and subordinate their work to the work of the constraint. The constraint must do only that which only the constraint can do. So by serving the needs of the system as a whole, rather than optimizing the performance of each silo in isolation, those units thus gained at the constraint are units gained for the whole system. By contrast, any improvement in work rate made at a non-constraint delivers nothing and destroys value.
In order to make any change in a system, one has to have a profound understanding of that system. Once we have an understanding of what that is, we then need to ask some new questions, challenge existing assumptions. By doing that, we actually invoke a different flow of innovation.
We see the world in a different way, so we will show you possibilities that you've never even dreamed of. And through our productivity solutions, we're able to give you 25% or more with the same resource base that you have, based on the principle that that bottleneck, if managed properly, is a place of high leverage.
The value add really at the end of the day is increased profits of less capital requirements, happier staff. We have a business with no debt, fantastic levels of stock and stock turn, a clear vision amongst our staff about what's important and what they need to work on every single day.
What theory of constraints does is that it provides the means, the mechanisms, the methods, the signaling systems, so that the whole enterprise works in sync to the drumbeat, if you like, of this rate determining step. That's when the magic starts to happen. That's when you start to see 25% or more increase in capacity, which you can use in any way that suits you. Go after new marketplaces, reduce the lead time, speed to market of product. There's one case that we have where the amount was somewhere of the order of $500,000 of additional profit per hour. And it's just a mind-boggling number. So it dwarfs whatever the effort is that's required to organize yourselves in that way. And it delivers that kind of a result.
But the real takeaway for me was that it helped me understand how my business was a system and how I could improve each constraint within it and therefore optimize the growth of my business.
In the first instance, think about what the possibility is. Think about what it is like to live in a world which is sustainable, which we could hand down to the 7th generation after us. Hold that as a possibility. Then think about what is the kind of productivity improvement that we need to have in order to be able to get to that place. Because at the same time as the global economy is going to be growing because of natural effect of China, India, Brazil, all of these countries increasing economic activity, we've got to reduce at the same time the amount of emissions, otherwise we're going to fry ourselves. The only way that that's going to be resolved is through an enormous productivity improvement.
The survival of corporations depends upon the survival of the Earth's natural systems. So if we're in a company or a family or a political system that is looking for new ideas, new answers around creative responses to the sustainability challenge, this is a fantastic way to access those kinds of insights.
The highest objective in our work is to relentlessly architect the most possibility we can from that organization.
Ensemble is about delivering sustainable improvement in business. We're saying that we have to hold true all 3 areas of sustainability: environmental, social, economic. And the way that we do that is by managing the bottlenecks which act as the leverage point, and by the whole organization understanding that, we're able to get remarkable results very quickly.